By now, you know Steve Baker, Blaze Media investigative journalist, has been charged for committing the crime of journalism on the Capitol grounds during the January 6th protest. He joins us now alongside his lawyer, Bill Shipley, to give us an update on his case. But before we do get into just Steve's case directly, Bill, I want to start just an overall picture of January 6th and where they're going now, because on Blaze News tonight, we have been highlighting the J6 cases, and there have been a couple different stories that have come out where, oh, you know what? They're not going away this year. Actually, the rate of arrests continue to increase so many years later.
Well, there's a story behind that. There was a period at the end of 2022 into early 2023 when the government quit arresting people because what had happened, in effect, was the court had become saturated. There was too many cases and not enough staff. You know, to have 1,000 cases suddenly pumped into the courthouse over the period of 12 to 16 months, just there was no capacity to continue. So a message was sent, I believe, based on what I've been told, to tell DOJ to pause, and they did. But that pause ended around the first of this year, and the pace of new arrests, new indictments, new trials, new guilty pleas has been pretty rapid since the beginning of 2024. And I started taking new clients in January, and probably in the last 8 months, I've taken 30 new clients.
Wow. So 30 new clients just for yourself alone in this period. They haven't stopped. They've ramped it up. Is there any silver lining here? I mean, it seems like some people have been helped by the Supreme Court ruling a while back, but is mostly they just keep going. There's no end in sight.
Right, and I had thought that most of the low hanging fruit had been taken care of, and the most obvious cases, the best video, the most easily identified defendants. We were through all that, but what it looks like is there was just a backlog, and they had, when they paused for a while, it created a whole, several hundred cases that, much like Steve's case, had been investigated in 2022 and were probably ready to go. And they didn't charge very many people during 2023, but then in 2024, sort of the flood all came forward at one time because they had resolved 600, 700, 800 cases. People, had either gone to trial or pled guilty. Remember, the first trial didn't take place until February of 2022, which was 13 months after the event. Right. So starting in February 2022, the rate of dispositions really picked up pace, and that took away sort of that saturation, and then the government could come back in and begin charging people again.
Steve, I want to bring you in the conversation, and I want to know how you found Bill as your lawyer and how you two guys met up in the first place.
Well, we became familiar with each other during the initial Oath Keepers trial. I was covering that trial in the courtroom for over 9 weeks, sitting there every single day, every minute of Oath Keepers 1. There were 3 Oath Keepers trials. And although Bill was not directly involved because he didn't have a client in that case, he was still consulting with the other attorneys. And then obviously we became acquainted through email and through social media chats, that sort of thing, and developed our relationship there. And then over the course of the next year, as my personal travails continued to ramp up, then Bill became much more interested in what was happening with me, and he should probably tell the rest of that story.
Well, I didn't have, the first Oath Keeper case was actually half of the first case. The judge in the case, there were 10 defendants. He split the case into 5 defendants went to trial first. The other 5 defendants went to trial second. I had a client in the second case. And then there was a third Oath Keeper trial, and I had a client in the third Oath Keeper case. And so I came to know Steve through just sort of his coverage of the case and my involvement. Then he got access to the additional video evidence in March of 2023, which I knew something about, obviously. And then I learned from him that he was under investigation. Having been a federal prosecutor myself for 21 years, I was able to sort of give him some insights as to maybe why his case was taking as long as it did. for the government to make a decision on whether to charge or not, and then just sort of the process of getting to know each other. He had to pick a lawyer, and we had dinner one night in D.C., and at the end of that dinner, I was his lawyer, and a couple others are involved with us as well. So we talked about the other people who had volunteered, and I knew them, and I said, absolutely.
So we want to get back to the updating on where Steve's case is, but first, while I have both of you here, one thing that we've learned had the privilege of having Steve come to work with us and do some amazing work over the last year, is that the audience is still interested. I mean, I know people out there in media who would say, "Oh no, you can't still do these stories. No one cares." But I think millions of people do care because they do see what happened here. They see this as injustice, and they're very concerned about what's happening, and they want to know more, and few media outlets are bringing that to them. Nonetheless, we are like years out from this, right? And you've been doing this a while. Do you sense the same thing I do, that interest has not gone away and that people are still right there? And in fact, I mean, my own view is that right up and through January 6, 2025, this is still a hot issue, and in fact is just rising to the fore, not diminishing. But I don't know what your experience has been.
Well, absolutely. I mean, obviously, it has essentially consumed my practice. When I started doing these cases in September 2021, I was still primarily located in Hawaii, which was the last place I had been served as a federal prosecutor. And I've now been doing them for 3 years, and it is I have 2 other cases that are not January 6th related right now, active. But it dominates my day. It dominates the inquiries that I get either from defendants or family members or friends or just interested parties. There is a segment of the electorate that still, looks back at 2020 with great suspicion, and the events of January 6th are viewed with great suspicion. And the fact that, every day almost I get notice of a new arrest. Somebody somewhere has been, the circumstances for them, their worst nightmares come true, like it did for Steve back in March or February. If the Department of Justice and the FBI would stop, the interest might wane, but they're not stopping. And depending on the outcome of the election, one or two things are going to be true. It's either going to all go away to a large degree based upon what former President Trump has publicly said, or we're going to keep seeing these right up through January of 2026, which is when the statute of limitations would expire.
All right, the people have waited long enough. Let's give them the update that they have been waiting for. What can you tell us about Steve right now?
Okay, well, Steve's case has been assigned to a district judge. We've had some limited pretrial matters before that judge. We have a motion pending right now to dismiss the case based upon selective prosecution on the basis that Steve, among 80 journalists known to be there that day, not authorized. In other words, there is a list that the Capitol Police have of journalists who were authorized to cover the events that day on the Capitol grounds inside the Capitol building. What I mean by that, the certification proceeding. That's what they were there with authorization to cover. But we know there were another 80 who were not on that list that were there that have not been charged. So why has Steve been charged? So we've made a motion based on selective prosecution, comparing his circumstances with these other uncharged journalists. That's pending. We actually have some paperwork that's due tomorrow on that, and then we should have a decision in the next couple of weeks. Steve has been extended an offer to plead guilty to one of the misdemeanor charges. We're talking about that. Lots of things that go into that decision. Not everybody's guilty, and not everybody's prepared to be a martyr. So the decision to plead guilty is a personal one that is dictated by the details of your life.
Well, Steve, it is your case. Let's give you the final word after all.
Well, the final word is that obviously I became a single issue voter for the first time in my life this year because former President Trump has promised, at least for the nonviolent offenders, to be pardoned. And so I'm all in on the Trump campaign this time. And in addition to that, I would just say that it's going to be important that the vote goes that way, not just for myself, but for so many others that are truly not guilty of real crimes that day. And my biggest fear, and Bill can probably speak to this better, is that particularly for somebody like me, if the election goes the other direction, there could be some celebratory retribution for some January 6 clients, and I'm concerned about that.